My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing W, Oliver Stone's 2008 movie about President George W. Bush and, to a lesser extent, President George H.W. Bush.
I, George Walker Bush,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
the office of President of the United States.
I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from his hometown in Glens Falls, New York, where he's exploring his own daddy issues in his childhood home, is Jim Robinson. Jim, are you ready to be put on the couch?
Well, Gary, ever since my father became vice president of a local small town bank, I've suffered the psychological scars of trying to live up to that. But I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, my father was not president or vice president of anything, so I never had the same psychological trauma that George W. Bush had. So, Jim, just like the 43rd president, you and I are both W's. Our middle initial is W. Do you think that makes us qualified to be president?
Well, I know that I would be an absolutely fantastic president. I'd be on Mount Rushmore in about a year, but I'm too young for the job.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, the answer, the correct answer is no, because you and I have a proper middle name, which I believe I'm William. You're William too, right?
That's right.
All right. So we're both named William, which is a very ordinary name. But most of the presidents elected in our lifetimes have family middle names. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Richard Milhous Nixon, Ronald Wilson Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, George Walker Bush, Barack Hussein Obama, and Joe Robinette Biden. Isn't that an interesting pattern?
That is interesting. Well, Obama, that was a family name, wasn't it?
That's what I said. Barack Hussein Obama, yeah. There was a family name, yes. All right, now that we've done a little history here, I've got one more little tidbit for you. W is obviously his middle name, and this movie is about presidential middle names. I have a quiz for you. Who is the first president with a middle name?
John Quincy Adams.
Bing, 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 bing. Yes, that's correct. And he's even mentioned in this movie.
Uh-huh. That's fascinating, Gary.
It is fascinating. My wife begged me not to put this in because she thought it was so boring, but here it is anyway. All right. So before we get to the movie, let's discuss our relationship with the Bushes. I think you've actually met both of them, right?
I've actually had private meetings with each Bush separately. Okay. And the circumstances were that I once was talking to Vice President George H.W. Bush about a possible speechwriting job in his upcoming presidential campaign. So this would have been 1987. And so I went to the vice presidential residence. Miss Millie was there, the vice presidential dog, and had a good talk with him. I was very surprised at how informal he was, and also how he dropped the F-bomb a few times just in normal conversation. So as we get to this movie and we see a more prim and proper father and a more audacious son, maybe that's not really true.
What about W?
Well, W, I was the organization I was working for. My boss and I were making the rounds of important political figures. So we went to Austin, and we had secured a meeting with Governor George W. Bush. And it was about an hour long, just talking about various business issues. This is business organization. And what impressed me about him was that he was not your typical backslapping politician. We had met with other governors on this tour, and they sat there and did the glad hand that, that's absolutely right. Oh, yes, that's a good point to everything we said. At one point, my boss said something about a policy issue related to the border and trucking issues. And George W. Bush looked at him and said, "Oh, that's bullshit." And I really liked that sort of plain talking. I'm not just going to agree with everything you said like a typical politician would. So that's my experience. Did you ever run into either of them?
I met Bush, the first Bush. I just shook hands with him. I had my picture taken when we were in the 1984 presidential campaign, when I was working for the campaign, and we went over to the White House and we had our pictures taken with Reagan and Nancy and George Bush. So I have a picture of myself. Actually, it's hanging in my mother's bedroom. A picture of myself shaking hands with the vice president. I never met him otherwise, but I was offered also. Oh, you actually, I guess you didn't get offered the job because you probably cut that off too soon.
Yeah, I was pretty much cut off, but
Yeah.
I can't say that they were kept chasing after me now.
Yeah, I was actually offered a job to be the Vice President Bush's speechwriter when I was working for the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative in 1986. I'd gone through the process and met with Clark Judge, who was his chief speechwriter, and they offered me a job, and I turned it down. I was never enthusiastic for anyone in that family. I supported Reagan over Poppy in 1980, and Kemp over Poppy in 1988, McCain over W in 2000, and Rubio over Jeb in 2016. I kind of have respect for Poppy as a war hero and a successful businessman and a gentleman, and I don't have a problem with the upper class WASPs who built and served this country during the 20th century, but his wishy-washiness for conservative causes really rubbed me the wrong way. And how he was ever selected as vice president is beyond me. I mean, it's just a weird thing for Reagan to have done. I mean, I guess I understand the mechanics of, well, we need a moderate to balance a conservative, but it was just a kind of a bad decision.
Well, he was kind of the staffer who became president.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a congressman at one point and ran, I think, unsuccessfully for Senate.
Correct.
From Texas. But he was basically in staff jobs, high-level staff jobs, but nonetheless, staff.
Yeah. CIA director, ambassador to China,
right.
Head of the RNC. I mean,
exactly.
Right. Why that guy, among all the people in America, thought he should be president is beyond me. And then somehow he ended up as vice president, which led to W being. So anyway, all that is
yeah, great. I'm with you. I have a lot of respect for Bush 1 in terms of, his war service and public service and what he did in life, his family. And I'm not crazy at all about his presidency. And in terms of George W. Bush, I have to say that like this movie, which we will get into, I have a really mixed view about him.
Yeah.
I think on the personal side, I can't think of a president who was more personally honest than George W. Bush. I honestly think he was not a liar like most presidents are, and was a good, sincere person and not a hater. But on the other hand, and some of this is brought out in the movie, there were huge mistakes during the presidency.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, well, first of all, going back to the first Bush, I mean, he was immensely popular and then squandered that lead by breaking his promise not to raise taxes.
Right. And then the economy turned a little bit sour.
Yeah.
And then importantly, and this was a lesson that George W. Bush took into his own presidency, he allowed a base insurgent to eat away at his support. And there's sort of a history in both parties that if you have a unified base, you have a much better chance of winning and getting reelected than if you allow a huge insurgency to develop.
Well, and then the insurgency I think you're talking about is Pat Buchanan.
That's right.
And got quite a lot of support during the primaries and got gave a very powerful speech during the convention. And then, of course, Wasn't that the year that Perot one ran?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
talk about insurgency. He's got 19% of
Right.
the vote.
Right. As for W, I mean, I didn't really like him in the beginning because he seemed to combine both the moderation of the establishment and the most extreme elements of the Christian right, which I wasn't in either group. But I did get behind him when he was the nominee, and I rallied around him because I thought of a lot of the attacks against him were unfair, snobby, or really attacks on all conservatives. That doesn't really come through enough in the movie, but the W was clearly the best politician in the family.
Yeah.
And Jeb was actually a very good governor of Florida, but a complete flop as a presidential candidate.
Yeah, I thought there's a lot of misconceptions about George W. Bush. For one thing, and this is not brought out in the movie, and it's one of the unfairnesses. For one thing, he was a voracious reader
Right,
of history.
right,
And everyone, made jokes. He even made jokes to himself about himself, being kind of shallow intellectually. But they had a kind of book reading competition in the White House that the president participated in and his top aides of who could read more books in a given period of time. And he would read all these historical tomes and biographies and would usually win the contest. Of course, I also sat there thinking of maybe if there had been a little more attention paid to the presidential decisions instead of reading books, we might have been a little better off.
right. The decisions of 2004 instead of 1804.
Right.
All right, all right. Well, this is enough. We've gone far enough down memory lane. Jim, what is this movie about?
Well, W is the third in a trilogy of films by Oliver Stone covering the trials and tribulations of US Presidents Kennedy, Nixon, and in this film, George W. Bush. It was released in 2008 while Bush was still president. It has been called a biographical comedy drama, which I think is fairly accurate. It tells the story of how an aimless, hard partying, heavy drinking troublemaker straightened out his life and very improbably got himself elected to governor of Texas and then later to become the 43rd president. It's not a straight line progression, however, and the story has less than a happy ending. The Bush family name and legacy are both blessings and curses for W. W has to deal with this burden and also the fact that Jeb Bush, not George, is probably the favored son. And having beaten expectations and become president, W is then shown sort of making a mess of things over the war in Iraq. He allows the hawks in his White House, led by Dick Cheney, to control and manipulate his decision making. All of his achievements, his setbacks, his life defining moments are portrayed in this film through a rather erratic series of flashbacks and fantasy scenes. Ultimately, I think we're left with a kind of a nuanced portrait of George W. Bush, and we sort of can feel sorry for him. He's not evil, he's not hateful, he doesn't lie, and he seems to mean well. Even as president, he's not particularly indecisive. You could even call him a strong leader in this film, but it's not enough. He seems out of his depth, and ultimately, according to the film, he'd probably be happier if he stayed with his first and true professional love, which is professional baseball. The film stars Josh Brolin as George W. Bush, Richard Dreyfuss as Dick Cheney, James Cromwell as George H.W. Bush, Elizabeth Banks as Laura, and Ellen Burstyn as Barbara Bush. And now over to you, Mr. Holmes.
All right. Well, I think that's great. It was better than the AI summary I concocted last.
Well, of course.
All right. So this is another in a long list of box office presidential movie duds that we've watched. The box office was 25.5 million, which is about what the budget was. But of course, once you factor in marketing expenses and other expenses, it lost money. It was ranked number 111 most popular movie in 2008. Pretty low number. The number one movie that year was the Batman movie, The Dark Knight, which grossed $533 million, followed by Iron Man, Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, Hancock, and Wall-E. Critical reception was mixed. It got 0 Oscar nominations. Why do you think it did so poorly? It's not bad.
Well,
It's not really a bad movie. Why did he think it did so bad?
I think one reason could be that it was not going to scratch the itch of the Bush haters. Look at the comparison with Fahrenheit 9/11, which came out in 2004. That was a documentary by Michael Moore. And I have never seen the whole thing, but I've seen enough snippets.
Yeah.
It's schlock. It's schlock, but it's pure, unadulterated hatred. And guess how much that grossed? $224 million against a cost of $6 million. So I think what we began in 2008 is probably something carrying through to today, which is you got to be on one side or the other and attract 150% of the audience or the other 50% of the audience to do well. Nuance ain't going to cut it.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good point about Fahrenheit. What was it? Fahrenheit what?
9/11.
Okay.
It made fun of it was 2004. So we hadn't even seen, the financial crash yet and all that. So it made fun of Bush reading a story to children, while 9/11 was going on, even though what was he supposed to do? Scare the hell out of those little kids, So it was a totally Bush hating, trashing movie, and liberal audiences absolutely ate it up.
So this came out right before the election of 2008, when W's popularity was at its lowest point. Not only was the Iraq War a disaster, but also we're in the middle of the banking crisis, and the recession created some of the worst economic times in a lifetime. And don't forget the PR disaster of Hurricane Katrina. I think people just didn't want to be reminded of him at that time.
Right.
And having a movie come out about the sitting president, I just think is bad. It's just a bad decision. I mean, we talked about this last time with Primary Colors, which was about Clinton, which came out during the Clinton presidency, and that was even worse flop than this one. I just don't think people are interested in watching movies about the sitting president, and
there's no distance.
Not critical
yet.
Enough, or they're too critical. Yeah,
there's no distance yet.
There's no distance yet. I mean,
it's not even including suspending your disbelief to consider an actor as the sitting president,
right?
When you can see the sitting president, and you do 20 times a day on other media.
Yeah. All right. Well, who would you recommend this movie to?
Well, as we were talking, I wouldn't recommend it to white hot George W. Bush haters, but I would recommend the movie to people interested in foreign policy and the defense strategy of the United States, because this movie includes, sometimes at great length, very pointed debates about what the posture of the U.S. should be in the post-Cold War and now currently terrorist-ridden, global environment we're in. So I would recommend it to them. I would also recommend it to people that are a little bit partially favorably inclined to George W. Bush, who want to see some of the backstory.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Bush supporters might like this movie, assuming there are any. I would also recommend it to people, general Oliver Stone fans. I mean, it was, it's a very clearly an Oliver Stone movie, and people who enjoy these easy psychological explanations to complicated world events, because there's so much in here about psychology and
Right.
up with his father. And I mean, it's the same thing like in Nixon. I mean, the childhood traumas never quite go away for these guys, according to our Oliver Stone, and they act as a result of that.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What did you like about the movie?
Well, I thought the acting was pretty good.
Mhm.
And, we'll go one by one shortly. I thought that the basic arc of Bush's life, even though the the flashbacks were kind of annoying at times, I thought the basic arc of his life was pretty accurate. It was portrayed pretty well. I thought it was good in terms of being a damning portrayal, really visualizing how momentous decisions could be made in almost a cavalier fashion, how hubris and arrogance can encroach on decision making, and also, as I thought that we would be interested in the role of wordsmithing in big decisions, because I've been in situations where the phraseology comes first and then you build a policy behind it, and that seems to be what happened here. So I
Well,
liked all that.
yeah, that's one of the things that I put down too, that I liked how the speech writing process is portrayed. I mean,
Yes.
you get a sense of what a tough job it is. First, you have to write the speech, and then you have to get it approved. And we both been through that, where you farm the speech out to a different, half a dozen different departments, and they all come back with their own opinions about what they didn't like about what you read, and you have to fix that.
Yes.
Um,
What did you like?
well, I think Oliver Stone, love or hate his politics, is a very talented director, and I actually like the way the movie rolled out. I was never bored. I actually thought the flipping back and forth between the present and the past was um, probably made sense, because otherwise the movie would have been one long stretch of boring meetings. So they're
Right.
interrupting all these meetings by going back to the past.
Yeah,
So
it would have been debauchery, then an epiphany, and then the White House long meetings,
yeah.
if there weren't flashbacks.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought the movie moved right along. So as a watching experience, I thought it was good. I also, like you, appreciated that it seemed to be a movie of ideas. Um, you need to think hard while you're watching this movie and weigh the differing views. I thought it was pretty even-handed, no stock villains. Not even Cheney, who usually gets portrayed as the bad guy, he's not really demonized here. And also I think this movie is less conspiratorial than usual. And W in particular is portrayed as someone who's motivated by trying to do the right thing. So I appreciate that he's a little bit more honest than usual about W's flaws and his strengths.
Yeah, I liked I liked the whole debate over preventative war,
Yeah,
because that's a hugely important debate, and it is to the current day, and also to get a sense of what the debate was like back then. This whole idea that with the war on terror, we should actually go into countries that hadn't yet specifically done something against us
right.
is an audacious concept. And that was the concept of the George W. Bush administration for a while.
Right.
And I think Iraq kind of discredited that. And I like the fact that that debate, was really fleshed out on both sides of it. So I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty good. On the flashbacks, I guess I have a like-dislike relationship to those. Because I see your point. If it was all linear, it would have been like 3 different movies and it would have gotten boring. But at some points, I thought the sequencing was off. For example, we see Bush making the decision to go into Iraq and taking out Saddam.
Yeah.
And then after that, we see a flashback where his father's losing re-election and where W is blaming the fact that his father didn't take out Saddam for having lost his re-election. Wouldn't it have made more sense to flip that and have him realize that first, and then you see how he makes a different decision in his presidency. So I thought some of the flashback sequencing didn't make sense, and it bugged me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I didn't like about the flashbacks in particular is it was really hard to sometimes hard to figure out what was actually going on. Not that for example, at his 40th birthday, are Laura and W married yet? It's not
Right.
really said until, so it's hard to figure out, are they still like dating or are they not dating? And then then we're at a poker game, and like, is W an oil man now? No one ever said anything about him being an oil man. So, he Oliver Stone assumes a lot of knowledge on our part, which, I mean, maybe people in 2008 would have understood, but it's been 20 years now, and I couldn't. Some of the flashback scenes were just confusing to me.
Yeah, and I also didn't really get, or they didn't really work for me, some of the symbolic dream type scenes, especially all the baseball stuff. I don't really get all that. I guess it's, the center field stuff, standing in center field in his business suit. I think I get it, but it didn't really work in my.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I didn't like any of there were 4 separate dream sequences. And of course, that I hate all dream sequences anyway. The first one, though, and I think the movie starts with a dream sequence. It shows him walking out with his presidential jacket on and the crowd is cheering, and he's walking towards the pitching mound.
But there is no crowd there, right?
There is no crowd there, right? There's no crowd, but you don't really know that at first. And I thought, oh, here we go. This is one of the most iconic moments of the Bush presidency, when he goes to Yankee Stadium and throws a pitch.
Standing fully exposed to thousands of people.
Right. Which was, I mean, very thrilling moment of his presidency. And but no, it's not that. It's just this vacuum, like whatever. He's in the middle of an empty stadium. So I didn't like any of those scenes.
Yeah.
A bigger problem for me, though, is all this cheap psychoanalysis about the edible structure between Poppy and W. Maureen Dowd of the New York Times always reduces policy decisions to the most simplistic childhood psychodrama, and this was a movie version of that. There's a long history in the movies of a protagonist trying to win the affection of his father, who prefers his more perfect brother. You see that in East of Eden, HUD, and that's just a little tiresome after a while. And the funny thing about this movie too is that there's always this talk about Jeb. Jeb did this, Jeb did that, Jeb's great, Jeb's in Harvard, but Jeb's not even in the movie. Basically, he's just in one scene. I mean, that was really an odd omission.
And I can't remember. He's the son of a famous actor. I can't remember who it was. It's just, I shouldn't have said anything because I can't remember.
Yeah, I didn't even bother looking him up because
but he was only in one scene. Jeb Bush, the real Jeb Bush, has called the sibling rivalry portrayed in this a bunch of hooey. But here's the thing about sibling rivalry and father's expectations. No one, especially prominent people, are ever going to admit it.
Yeah.
So what's Jeb going to say? What's W going to say? What's Bush 1 going to say? Oh, yes, there was. So they're not going to admit it. My hunch is I think there was a fair amount there.
I think I agree with you that there was a certain amount of it. I mean, when your father is president of the United States, and I mean has been a war hero on the greatest Yale baseball team of all time, has done this, a successful millionaire, building his own business and stuff. I mean, you can feel, you can understand that you feel like you're not really measuring up. But now we don't. But the constant push about Jeb. I mean, I think that is probably overrated.
Yeah, probably. What we don't know is A, whether George W. Bush ever saw the movie, and B, what did he think? Now, Bill Clinton has told Oliver Stone and the screenwriter separately, and that he personally handed a copy of the film to George W. Bush and said, "I think you'll like this." But we don't know. First of all, we don't know if that's true, but probably true. But we don't know if he ever watched it. My guess is he wouldn't like it, only because of what I know about how thin-skinned and prickly most CEOs, politicians are. You know, Gary is a PR
Yeah, no,
guy.
yeah.
You get a Wall Street Journal article profile about your boss that's 48 paragraphs, but in paragraph 47, there's something he doesn't like. And even though the rest of it's glowing, he's pissed off, right?
Yeah, leads to another thing I didn't like about the movie. Although it's generally sympathetic to Bush, the movie really demeans him in a personal way. You know, when he sits behind that desk in the Oval Office, his chair is so low that he looks like a little boy. And the movie also makes him look really crude. The way he eats is disgusting. And
Right.
we didn't really need to see him sitting on a toilet seat. And the movie also makes him look dumb. I mean, like when he says he'll do whatever it takes to get fully briefed to run for governor, he'll even read the whole Constitution.
That was one of my favorite lines. I
Oh,
thought
sorry.
that was a comedic line. I'll even read the whole Constitution if I have to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
it's a great line.
I didn't think it was funny because it was just so stupid. I mean, who would say that?
I think it's funny. But I agree with you in this sense. I think there was a larger point that Stone was trying to make in some of the things you pointed out. And maybe this, if you compare this with the way he kind of liked Richard Nixon's approach,
yeah,
you know, the Machiavellian approach, it's almost like Stone is saying, being a good guy isn't enough to being a good president. Being an honest guy isn't enough. Being a decisive guy, if all you're running on is your religion and your sort of trivial instincts, your nostrums about patriotism and all that, that's not enough in the tough real world of geopolitics and national politics. And I think that's one of the conundrums brought out by this movie, is how you can be a basically decent, honest, well-meaning guy and still be a bad president.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, if you think about it, there was no reason for W to be president either. I mean, he owned a baseball team, or purportedly owned a baseball team. He was a front man. And then he was governor of Texas for a semester, or a year, for a term.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, come on.
And it's a weak executive system there.
Right.
So it's not like he had the reins of executive power to a great extent. But he did a good job. He was as you pointed out before, he was a good politician. This is a guy who in his re-election especially got like 60-something% of the Hispanic vote.
Yeah. Well, and he was more successful than his father was. I mean,
right.
His father,
he got reelected.
he got reelected, and anyway. One other thing that I thought I didn't really like about the movie, and not that I wanted it longer, but it's a lot missing. It doesn't show like 9/11, so we don't see the trauma that led to this Bush and Cheney's obsession with protecting the homeland. And what's also missing is the widespread bipartisan support for the war. I mean, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, John Kerry, Nancy Pelosi, they all believed Saddam had WMDs and fully supported the war. But except for the scene at the address to Congress where you see the Democrats clapping, this is not factored into the movie at all.
Yeah, I actually thought they exaggerated the protests against the war. You know, they showed film of protests, and there were some protests and there was opposition, but it was not as widespread as we were led to believe until later.
Yeah.
Until it became a flop. I agree with you on the 9/11 stuff, because that also gave rise to some of George W. Bush's really outstanding leadership moments.
Right.
Standing on the pile of rubble, the pitch at Yankee Stadium, the speech to Congress, which is one of the best presidential speeches of all time. So I think you're right about that, but it didn't need to be longer.
And it did not need to be longer now. Maybe a little fewer. Maybe some, if they cut out some of the references to Jeb, they could have put in something more. So what do you think Oliver Stone was trying to accomplish here?
I think we've touched on it. I think he was trying to, to give, he made it clear he did not want to do a polemic, anti-Bush polemic. So he was trying to get inside another US president. As I said, it's the third of a trilogy.
Right.
Now, the JFK movie is not really all that much about JFK. That is a love letter. To the extent it's about JFK, it's a love letter. But I thought he was just trying to present a full-bodied, fleshed-out portrait of George W. Bush. He was also trying to shed some light on what it takes to be a good president, which, as I said, is not necessarily the same thing as being a good person. And he was trying to vividly portray this debate over how the U.S. operates in the world in a post Manichean Cold War era.
If you think about it, JFK, which is about the Kennedy assassination, and Nixon, which is about Watergate, and now this war, this movie, which is about the war, they're all about national traumas. And
yeah,
I think he's trying to explain how these national traumas and tragedies came into place. So we've got all these. I think he's trying to explain to us what's going on. You don't necessarily have to agree with his conclusions, but yeah, I think that's kind of what he's doing.
I think there's a lot of sincerity in this movie on the part of the filmmakers. I think they were trying to make what they felt was a true to history movie, yeah. and to do it sort of before anybody else, because Bush was still president.
All right. Well, let's discuss the actors. This is kind of like the movie. This is kind of like three movies we've already seen: Nixon, 13 Days, and Primary Colors, because there's so many meetings in there, and we get to see the president and the first ladies and the members of their family and the staff, and they're almost like our own family. So we know everyone so intimately that so we spend the first half of the movie saying to ourselves, "Hey, there's Condi," and "Hey, is that Paul Wolfowitz?" So there are a lot of impersonations to discuss here. About let's just stick to the top ones. So
sure.
What about Bush 23? Bush 43?
I thought Josh Brolin did quite a good job. He had a very heavy lift because he had to portray all sorts of different scenes and scenarios and ages. So he was picking up a girl, drunken bar pickup, and then he had to be in the Oval Office making big decisions. So I think he did quite a good job. I thought he carried it off pretty well. He had the smirk was good, the Bush smirk, the Bush swagger walking across his ranch while he's deciding to go to war. I thought he's pretty good. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I thought his accent was right. The mannerisms were right. A bit of a cliche, but not too much. As I discussed earlier, I don't think he's personally as gross as Brolin plays him, and he's probably smarter too. But I thought I thought it was a very good job. What about?
He had a lot of charm, and he was very charming.
Yeah.
In some of those scenes when he was having his first talk with Laura,
yeah,
and all that.
Yeah.
He probably had more charm than the real W.
Oh, I completely believe that he's more charming than the way he's portrayed in this movie.
Now, what's interesting?
More charm than portrayed in the movie. What about Poppy?
Well, I got to do one more thing, Gary.
Okay.
Christian Bale was signed to do this movie and play George W. Bush.
Okay.
He was right to the point of going through makeup and wardrobe and all that. And supposedly he's the one that decided, I just can't do this. I think I'm going to flop. And he backed out. And then there was some dalliance with Harrison Ford, try to get him to do it. So Brolin was sort of a last minute stand-in. earning that place as the result of his performance in No Country for Old Men, which was the year before. So he lucked out and he made good on it.
Yeah, no, Brolin, he's had a quite surprisingly good track record as a movie star. I mean, he's not a major movie star by anything, but he's had a good career.
Right. As for Cromwell playing George H.W. Bush, I thought he was great. I thought he was really good. Um, I wouldn't have, if I hadn't, I know this is totally superficial comment. If I hadn't had that one meeting that I had with the real George Bush Sr., I might have thought that maybe they were fantasizing his tough talk and his sort of acid way of talking too much. But I saw a little of that in real life. And so I therefore thought Cromwell was pretty good.
So this is one point where we disagree. I thought
Okay.
he was actually bad
Okay.
and not believable at all. I thought he was one-dimensional. Cromwell plays Poppy as a tight ass, a sanctimonious Yankee patrician. He never smiles once, and it doesn't show any of George H.W. Bush's personal warmth or kindness. Poppy. I mean, I don't know what to call these guys because they all have so many stupid nicknames, and they have the same first and last name.
But Poppy is George H.W. Bush,
Poppy
the
is
elder
George H.
Bush.
That's what they call him in the movie. That's, whatever. We could call him 41, I guess, or we could call him whatever. He has a real zestful life, right? I mean, that cigarette boat he's always driving so fast, and the skydiving, and he has a million friends. And, I just think he's a warmer father and a warmer person in general, and a better. I mean, I wouldn't mind being friends with the real George H.W. Bush, but I certainly wouldn't want to be friends with the James Cromwell version.
Okay. Well, maybe it's because of my general opinion about Poppy.
All
But
right,
I,
all
I
right,
therefore liked Cromwell's portrayal.
okay, all right. We can disagree on this. Laura Bush was played by Elizabeth Banks. That she was the perfect wife. And she's actually my favorite character in the movie. I wish we could have seen more of her. I can see why he's so crazy about her, but don't really understand what she sees in him. But they apparently they got engaged very soon after they met, so this is a real love match. I can't believe that the real Laura Bush loved seeing how much Elizabeth Banks smoked in this movie, but
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I don't share your enthusiasm. I thought she was a decent support player, but she didn't make a huge. She didn't impress me that much. She did her job. It is very interesting and true, most likely, from what we know, that we saw a truly strong presidential marriage. If you
yeah,
consider the marriages that came before and the marriages that have come since, that I think that was another on Oliver Stone's balance sheet
yeah.
of all the good qualities. Another one was George W. Bush had a very strong, loyal, good marriage. And again, which doesn't necessarily make you a good president.
Right, right, right. Um, what do you think about Barbara Bush, Ellen Burstyn?
I thought she was really off at first. The
Yeah,
first couple scenes, I thought, who is this? She's probably the most storied actor in the whole movie, maybe except for Richard Dreyfuss, the most celebrated. But I thought she got better as the movie went along. I thought she was good in the scene where they were all commiserating over the loss of the re-election, and she starts lashing out at the press, which is what she did. She was just absolutely hated the media, and so I thought she got better as the movie went along.
I'm actually not in a position to judge whether this is a good impersonation or not, because her public persona as a kindly old grandmother is just so strong. And I know I read a million places but that behind the scenes she's a tough old broad, But I don't know. I found it hard to believe. I'm sure this is probably an accurate portrayal. It's just so different from what her public persona is.
Yeah, yeah.
What about
I,
Dick Cheney?
I thought Dreyfus was very good. Um, I liked the way he talked out of the side of his mouth.
Yeah, yeah,
He sort of made even very not evil but very controversial points in a soft-spoken way. I liked the way in the first opening Oval Office scene early in the movie, he's sort of lurking at the doorway,
yeah.
watching what's going on. I thought he was very good.
I thought he was too. I thought he was very believable. And I also thought it was interesting that you have Bush like telling Cheney to cool it, or keep his ego in check, just not to lord it over everyone at the meetings, and wanted to make sure everyone knew that he was in charge and not Cheney.
Which, from what I've read, is true, happened.
Yeah.
That he did do that, at least on a very pointedly, on at least one occasion.
For example, then there was this other scene where Cheney comes in and he tries to get Bush to sign these papers on enhanced interrogation, which some people call torture. And you can tell he's trying to get him to sign it, and he's like, "I'm going to read it first." And he's like, "Okay, well, we need this answer." And it's like, "I'm going to read it."
I said I'd look at it.
I said, "Look at it."
Yeah.
Get the hell out of here and
And
let me eat lunch.
that's the George W. Bush that I know from historical reading and the brief glimpse I got in that meeting I was in.
Yeah,
That's
that was
the,
another
that's the way
meeting
he is.
that was another meeting that took place while he was eating. I've never
Yeah.
really seen as much eating in any movie as I've seen in this movie.
Yeah. I'm going to do an honorable mention for somebody.
Sure, go ahead.
Stacy Keach as his sort of the hand holder of George W. Bush as he was becoming born again. His speech, I almost became born again, and that's saying a lot. But his talk to George W. Bush when Bush was having this existential crisis and was about to let Jesus come into his life, that was the best he was the best politician in the movie. It was so convincing and soothing. And I thought he was really good.
All right, so it probably won't surprise you that this is my favorite scene in the movie. So I'll talk about this more later.
Okay.
I will say that Stacey Keach, that character is a fictitious character. It's not an impersonation of anyone in particular. It's Billy Graham and a bunch of other preachers. So I thought he was very good. I mean,
what was so interesting and so nuanced was later on he reappears when Bush is about to run for president.
Right.
And Bush says, "I don't want to be president, but I'm running for president because God told me to." And the look on Stacy Keach's face was almost like, what have I created here?
Yeah.
That's not exactly what we mean in the religious community in terms of seeking, God telling me to do things.
Right.
I mean, it was a bridge too far, even for such a devout person as the Stacy Keach character.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else you want to call out? I mean,
No.
some of them Condi looked good. Rove looked okay. I mean,
Yeah.
Rumsfeld didn't look anything like Rumsfeld, but whatever. All right, let's turn to the history, the accuracy. I'm gonna start.
Sure.
First, because I have a little bit of a diatribe here that I want to talk about. Because I've been thinking about this a lot because it was recently the 20th anniversary of the start of the war, a few months ago, and National Review and everyone else had all these articles about looking back. And as I said, National Review in particular had a special issue, and most of those writers said the war was a disaster. Some said it was worth it. But here's my take. By not ousting Saddam, Poppy might have felt virtuously prudent, but he left a ticking time bomb for his son. He created a series of measures to keep Saddam in a box, including a no-fly zone and an economic embargo. And none of these things could last forever. And when Bush became president, all that was breaking down and you either had to lift all those sanctions or oust him because Europe just wasn't prepared to enforce a never-ending embargo. So in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when everyone was feeling bad about not having prevented the 9/11 attacks and scared of what might happen next, it was hard to stand by and let Saddam develop anthrax or nuclear weapons. So if there had really been weapons there, I still think it would have been worth doing. But here's the thing, even if they had found WMDs, it wouldn't have changed how the occupation went. The way we managed the occupation, disbanding the army in particular, was just terrible. So,
yeah, it was I was a strong supporter of the war. And like many other conservative leaning people, I think I was totally wrong. I don't think anything was ticking at all. I think if Saddam were there today, things would be not good in Iraq, but not any worse. And you're right about the execution. And sometimes even a bad or an extreme decision can be made okay by a good execution of a strategy. But it was a horrible execution. Colin Powell was the hero of this movie, to the extent there was a hero, in the way he kept warning and articulating. Of course, that didn't stop him from being the good soldier and playing along and going before the UN and lending his credibility to the war. I think it was a disaster, and I think it was a disaster not just because WMD weren't found, but because of the idea that we can go into a country like that and remake the nation. So this doesn't really have to do with the history of the movie, though.
right, right.
And I think what the movie does, obviously, it takes the point of view that it was a big mistake,
Right.
but it does show the debate that was going on. It shows, the debate on both sides. I do think, though, if you look at what Cheney was saying and what Wolfowitz were saying and Rumsfeld, they were becoming close to villainous caricatures at that point. I mean, somebody asked Wolfowitz, "What's the exit strategy for Iraq?" I think Powell asked him in a Situation Room meeting, and Wolfowitz almost hungrily said, "There is no exit."
Well, that was Cheney, actually.
Yeah.
And this part, I think, was probably, I don't believe, I obviously was not in these meetings, so I don't know, but I don't believe that Cheney got up there and was making this speech about oil, how it was all about oil.
Standing in front of a world map.
A world map where
I thought he was like
clicking
Dr.
things and
Strangelove. He was
yeah,
a Dr. Strangelove character. I thought that bordered on caricature at that point.
right.
But I thought that debate was really interesting.
No, I thought the debate was very good up until that point, and I don't think they would have been so obvious, especially in those meetings, to say, well, this is really all about oil. And I'm certain that Cheney would never have said, we are 5% of the population, but we consume 25% of the world oil. That is a left wing talking point that's been going on for like 50 years now. And so I don't think Cheney would have said that. And it's also shown to be not right. I mean, we were energy independent just,
2.5 years ago.
4 or 5 years ago, before someone else was elected president. So anyway, but I think I agree with you. I think the accuracy of the movie was generally good. They cut it off at a certain point. What's missing, of course, is that W fired Rumsfeld in 2008 and then implemented the surge and left Iraq in much better shape than it was during the early days of the
right.
So you kind of miss. I mean, it ends in the worst possible time in the Iraq War.
Yeah, I thought the history was pretty. I mean, put aside the fantasy scenes,
Yeah,
and all that. I thought it was pretty accurate in terms of national events. Not fully airing all sides of those events, but fair enough.
Fair enough.
This
And
is,
I
yeah,
also was surprised to find out that the scene where George W. Bush decides to give up alcohol is apparently accurate. I mean,
yeah,
I had heard there was much more dramatic than that, but he just wakes up, according to Laura Bush's memoir, he just wakes up one morning on after his 40th birthday and says, "I'm quitting." And then that's how it really happened. I mean, there was none of these, you know, she didn't threaten to leave him if he didn't stop drinking. I mean, it was just I mean a
yeah,
lot.
I read that too. It really was a kind of epiphany,
Yeah,
and the kind of person who could wake up one day and just say, "I'm stopping," and
yeah,
stick to it. And a lot of this movie, a lot of the sympathy in this movie does go to George W. Bush's will.
yeah.
I almost said triumph of will. I won't, because that has that
Another
has
movie.
bad
I don't think we'll
connotations.
be reviewing that one.
I don't think so. But that's kind of what it was. A guy that really did turn his life around.
Yeah.
And
I have one very dumb thing to complain about, and it's the second scene in the movie. We're at the fraternity initiation. Now Bush is joining a fraternity called Delta Kappa Epsilon, which is known as Deke. The members are known as Deeks, but in the movie they call themselves Delta Capsters. I mean, it's just dumb and it sounds so phony, and it sort of makes you wonder about the rest of the movie's accuracy. I mean,
yeah,
I mean,
I didn't delve into
yeah,
that
I know you
guy.
didn't delve
Sorry.
into it. I just happen to know a bunch of geeks, and I'm sure if they ever saw this movie and heard themselves referred to as Delta Capsters, they would have a heart attack.
I spent that scene worrying about if they were going to show somebody throwing up, because, as you know, I hate that.
That was an interesting idea. The thing about it that was interesting in that movie, though, in that scene, was this is apparently how George W. Bush got his penchant for naming people with nicknames, because he needed to memorize the names of everyone in the room, and he'd developed a nickname to go with their names, which I thought was kind of cute.
Yeah, yeah. Want to go to favorite scenes?
Yeah. All right. I've already said that my favorite scene is his talk with the minister about how to feel God's presence. Now, as you know, I go to church a lot and I go to Bible study, and I can tell you that this is very realistic. He's given up drinking, but doesn't have the feelings that other Christians feel. And this is actually what, growing your faith is like. It's a lot of people think that you're going to get struck with lightning and one day you're going to feel God's presence. But it actually takes a long time. And I think the minister's advice is private, is actually quite profound. Where he says, if you want to treat everyone you meet, your friends, your enemies, everyone, like they're going to be dead at midnight, you give that person all the love that's in you, and you do it without any thought of reward, and your life will never be the same again. I mean, that's really what really Christian ministers will preach. I mean, they're not really preaching about judging other people and consigning them to hell and that kind of thing, but treating them with love. I mean, so I thought that was extremely realistic, and I just love that scene. And you're right. And I actually think it's a good advice to try and treat everyone that you meet like they're going to die, and you have to be sympathetic to them.
I really liked that scene too. It was one of my favorites. And I think in the beginning of that scene, George W. Bush basically said, "All I am is a name,"
Yeah.
which I thought was so moving, sadly moving. And then to have the Stacy Keach character come in and offer his soothing, words. I thought it was great.
Did you
Another
have a
one of
favorite
my,
scene?
yeah, I like the opening Oval Office scene where they were coming up with the axis of evil,
Yeah.
because I thought it was realistic. I've been in meetings like that, not in the Oval Office, and but how the turn of the phrase takes on a life of its own, and then say, okay, now who are we including in the axis of evil? So the phrase comes first. Words controlling policy. I really like that scene. I like the one where they're doing a fast-paced walk on the Bush Ranch, And that's where you see the Bush swagger as he's deciding whether to go to war, and the other aides in their business attire trying to keep up with him, and Powell getting in his 2 cents worth.
And
that
then
was
they're
sort
all,
of
and then they're lost,
right. They're lost, and
which
it was
is,
almost,
a kind of on the nose metaphor for his whole presidency, right?
right. So I thought that was a really good scene. Did you have any others?
It's not exactly a favorite scene, but I was struck by the scene when the usual team meets after the war to discuss why they haven't found any WMDs.
That's on my list.
Okay, the buck passing there is amazing. That's not my job, and no one told me to do it.
Yeah, and only one, can't remember who, but
David
one
Kay, whose name
officer
I had
resigned.
completely forgotten about. He's the weapons inspector. I mean, he says that he believed they were there, and says that Saddam pretended he had them because he didn't want his own people to think he didn't, because he wanted them to be scared that he was going to use them against them. Plus, he thought Bush was bluffing. So, I mean, I thought that was a really realistic scene.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. And boy, does that happen a lot.
Yeah.
Remember John Kennedy?
Oh, yeah.
Failure is an orphan, but victory has 1,000 fathers.
Well, also,
Which
I mean,
he
there's
took
a lot
from
of
somewhere else.
yeah. And also in that movie, 13 Days, there was a lot of buck passing in that movie too.
Right. But my favorite scene of all, because I did tend to like the White House scenes more than the flashback scenes. But I thought was the penultimate meeting in the Situation Room, where Bush decides to mobilize for the war in Iraq. Powell had a chance to make his best case. Why have we veered from what we were set out to do with this war on terror? Cheney does his standing in front of the map and giving his case. And then Bush in that scene, what was so interesting, is strangely passive. You forget the president of the United States is in there.
Yeah.
But then at the end, after being a bystander, he says, well, we're going to mobilize. I just thought I thought that was gripping from a policy standpoint, not from a cinematic standpoint.
Yeah, I know. I know. And I have to say in that scene, I thought Powell didn't present his case as well as he should have. The argument wasn't whether we're losing focus on Afghanistan, but whether or not, what do we do if Saddam has nuclear weapons? Do we let him, if he's building nuclear weapons, do we let him go ahead and do it? Or do we invade and take them out? And he didn't address that at all.
Right.
So, the argument against proceeding against a country that has weapons of mass destruction, that has used them against its own people and could theoretically use them against us, I mean, was not really made very strongly by anyone in this movie.
Right.
All right. Any other favorite scenes?
No, that covers it.
Favorite lines?
Yes, I thought after W was involved with supposedly made some bar pickup girl pregnant.
Yeah.
I love the Poppy's line, who do you think we are? Who do you think you are, a Kennedy? You're a Bush. I just thought that, that you have to like that as catnip.
Right. Right.
I like that line. How about you?
My favorite line was after that meeting that you just discussed, Colin Powell says to Cheney, and reminding him of the Kuwait.
Keep it PG rated, Gary.
Yeah, no, he says it's funny, Dick. I remember you once agreeing that going all the way to Baghdad would be a mistake, and Cheney says, "Well, I think you made a bigger boo-boo, Colin. You could have been president." And Colin Powell says, "F you,"
right.
because he knows it's true.
I know
he absolutely could have been president if he'd run, and he didn't. So he gave up the chance to make that decision.
Even Bill Clinton was petrified of that, because it would have been against Bill Clinton, the incumbent, and Bill Clinton was known to have said, sort of losing. He's going to run. He's going to beat me bad.
What's your favorite?
I liked when W tried to run for Congress in an open seat against Kent Hance,
Yeah.
who won after he lost. He said, "I'll never be out Texaned or out Christianed again." I thought that was a good line.
Right, right. Um, Another favorite line of mine for personal reasons. Laura, when she when she meets Bush and he backs away because she voted for LBJ, she says, "I don't think politics should define a human being. There's more to people than how they vote." Now, of course, I like that line because I'm in a mixed marriage.
You have to believe that.
I have to believe that.
You're in a mixed marriage politically.
Mixed marriage politically, yeah. But I think that's actually, a good way to operate in life in general. I mean, our country would be so much better off now if people would just
Right.
take a chill pill about politics.
Yeah, well, Laura Bush was known to have said at one point, confessed to people, "I'm a Republican by marriage."
Yeah,
So I don't think we can say the same about your wife.
no, no, we cannot say that about my wife. No.
I like Rumsfeld's line when he said at one point, almost drooling. He said, 9/11 is an opportunity for us to sweep up all the bad guys in one big move." And I think that, it's an exaggerated line, but I think it captures some of the hubris
Yeah,
that had set in terms of the war on terror.
right.
And then, as I said before, you already mentioned it. I love the line, W's line to Rove when he was running for governor, and he says, "Just tell me what to do. If I have to, I'll read the whole damn Constitution."
These are not my favorite lines, but I do want to mention that the movie uses the phrases both "drain the swamp" and "never ending wars," which
I didn't catch that.
which reminds us that when Trump ran for president, he ran against everything, good or bad, that the Bushes stood for. So
Right, right.
I was like, they said "drain the swamp" twice, referring to Iraq, and they definitely said "never ending wars."
Because I don't remember those phrases being in circulation back then. So maybe somebody took it from the movie.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. All right. So what is the relevance to politics and society today?
Well, I think the most obvious thing is this whole debate over our defense and geopolitical strategy.
Right.
Do we retrench and pull in, have Fortress America, which a lot of people argue for, and basically wash our hands of trying to improve conditions in countries around the world, make the world safe for democracy? I think that's a hugely relevant debate. And this movie brings out a lot of those issues and uses as its case study probably the number one miscue when it comes to try to proactively, secure our safety and improve a country, the war in Iraq.
I think it's still really relevant. I mean, the same questions that are debated in this movie still need to be asked. I mean, how do you decide what to do if you have limited information? How do you avoid hubris? How do you balance idealism and realism? How much sacrifice are the American people willing to endure to promote peace in a foreign country? These are the same questions we're asking today in Ukraine, possibly in Taiwan, and definitely in the Middle East.
Yeah, and sadly for today, I think it's relevant because it shows you just the fact that the movie was made, and it was made by basically a left-wing filmmaker to be able to make a nuanced portrait of a right-wing president.
Yeah.
I just think I don't think you'd see that today, and that's too bad. Well, same on the other way around.
Well, that goes to one of our wrap-up questions here. I mean, whether this movie could be made today. I mean, you just basically answered it. No,
I don't think so. And you can, when I'm surfing my Amazon Prime account and going through hundreds of movies that I don't care about, you see all sorts of documentary offerings a lot about Trump, but others that you just know are just one Johnny one note diatribes
Right.
with nothing. And the same in terms of right wing documentaries on regarding the Democratic Party, the Dinesh D'Souza kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And even beyond that, I don't think it could be made because George Bush is basically irrelevant today. The liberals who hated him with a white hot passion now tell themselves that he wasn't as bad as Trump is.
Right.
And we forget how really, really, really how much they hated him, even though he was personally upstanding and he didn't lie, and they just hated him for what he was. I mean,
Oh yeah.
the smirk was more damning than almost anything.
Right. Oh, and there's plenty of Hitler invocations too.
Yeah, yeah.
We see them today all the time, but
But at the
with
same time, he's disavowed by conservatives too. I mean, he's basically a person with no party.
Yeah, he's in no man's land.
He's in no man's land. If you were a high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
Yes, I would, because I think it really, first of all, I think it's interesting enough for the students, some of the flashback scenes. They probably don't know a lot of the backstory of George W. Bush, but more importantly, I think it could lead to a lot of discussion about when the United States should deploy its nuclear power or its military power and when it should not.
Yeah, I also agree. I would definitely show this because it demonstrates how the sausage is made. I would say though that before you show this movie, you have to have a couple of classes laying out the chronology because, as I said, the movie assumes you know more than you probably do.
Right.
All right. How would you grade it?
B minus.
Okay.
It's not his best. It's not his best. It's decent enough. I'd recommend it for people that are interested in presidents and presidential movies.
Yeah, me too. I'd give it a B, which is slightly better than you, but okay. All right. So we're at the end of another exciting conversation about presidents in the movies. Jim, I think you know that I'm going on vacation and I won't have access to my suite of recording, editing, and posting services. So we're going on a bit of a brief hiatus, but we'll be back at the end of August.
Okay. I want to make it perfectly clear to the audience, this hiatus is not due to poor ratings, which is usually the reason why productions go on hiatus.
Well, speaking of high ratings, I want to mention again that the podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. You can subscribe there, and I would definitely encourage you to subscribe. And particularly if you're listening on Spotify, please subscribe. We don't have many listeners there, which I don't understand. Our next movie will be Jefferson in Paris. So if you want to watch the movie before our discussion, you can watch that on Prime, YouTube, and Google Play.
Have you seen that movie before?
I have not seen it.
I haven't either.
No,
I'm looking forward to it.
it's going to be completely different from all the movies, the last like 5 or 6 movies we've seen, because we're going way back. And I can promise you that no one in this movie, Jefferson in Paris, says F you. So
well, but we are showing great courage by even discussing Thomas Jefferson.
That will be an interesting discussion, yes, because yes. All right. So again, if you have comments, just send me an email at garyholmes@76.com. And I will see you in a month. And see you later, Jim.
Just remember, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Cheerio. Goodbye.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Who do you think you are? A Kennedy? You're a Bush. Act like one.